Brice is back with us. Brice, thanks so much for coming back through all the trials and the turmoil testing out the new system. We'll see if this is any better.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, and I assume you can hear me. Can everyone else hear the guest? I assume so. This system did work. The only problem with the system is that, like, if I have a guest on TikTok and I have a guest on Streamlabs at the same time, the two different guests can't talk to each other. Which I really thought the new system would fix that, but it doesn't. It just creates new problems. So we'll stick with this for a while. It'll be okay. But Brice, thanks for being patient with us.
Oh yeah, it took a while to figure out, but finally found this stream.
So what's
Um,
what's your
so yeah,
background?
Justin. So I'm a conservative Christian in Texas. So the bane of all atheist existence, I guess,
So
or
yeah,
progressive existence.
you're where you're from. People don't just believe in Christianity; they have Christian belt buckles.
Oh, for sure, and is the Christian belt buckle. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. So all right, then I assume you're at least 18, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So what would be the for you the most convincing evidence or argument for why the Christian God is real?
Just the objective evidence, regardless of how I feel about it or anything else. Just that's the only logical conclusion I could come to. And I want to start off with a question that I haven't found an atheist answer to, or even a try to answer, and maybe I just haven't found it, just my own lack of research. What is the motive for the formation of the Bible? Because for the Book of Mormon and the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, you can see the clear objective. You can see the clear motive of Muhammad. Obviously, benefited from it. He pulled from the Old Testament, the biblical sources that were already there. Same with Joseph Smith. You can see the obvious motive. But with the Bible, I can't find any other motive than to say that its claims are true. So I wanted to hear your opinion on that.
Well, I think every book has individual motives, and not just every book. I mean, the individual authors
Mm-hmm.
within the book, right? So, for example, like if you're familiar with the documentary hypothesis and the multiple redactors of the Pentateuch, you can clearly see that they had different conceptions. But to me, Genesis is an origin story, and the evidence seems to suggest that as the Israelites were taken captive in Babylon, they tried to
Mm-hmm.
integrate their mythological origin stories with the Babylonian origin stories, which is why all the stories in the first 11 chapters of Genesis, I could find parallel stories in the Babylonian literature. So they
Sure.
definitely were coming into contact with people that were like, no, this is the way the world is. This is how the cosmos is. This is how God is. And the people that were in captivity in Babylon, right? No, that's not the way it is. We're going to tell you the way it is, right? And so there's
Right.
clearly some dialogue back and forth between the multiple cultures that led to the formation of the earlier parts of Genesis. And then the latter parts of Genesis seem to come from probably, believe it or not, an earlier source. I think they come from the Assyrian invasion, because what happened when Assyria came down and wiped out the 10 tribes? Do you know what happened to all the people?
No, go ahead.
Well, some of them were taken captive in Syria, but a lot of them migrated north into Judah because Judah at that time period had gotten pretty dang strong. And so they migrated into Judah thinking that would be a safe haven. And it turned out that it was, right? So what we
Right.
find is in the second half of Genesis, we find a lot of origin story that is like describing how Israel came to be a people group, because this was very important to them at that time period. Now we've got these two different people groups that are living together. How is it that we came to this point in history? And they needed a unified story to explain it. And so that's how you got the patriarchal narratives, but it's also how you ended up with doublets in the patriarchal narratives. Like, for example, there's 2 episodes of Sarah getting taken captive by a king because she was pleasing. And then Abraham had to say, no, she's my sister. And then there's actually a triplet because it happens again with Isaac and Rebecca. So we've got
Sure.
some really strange anomalies because the North and the South, when they merged, they had similar stories, but then they had to merge them together into one story, and that's you get some problems when you merge them together. So like Genesis to me, it are just a people trying to explain how they came to be, you know. But that's
Okay.
just one book. We can do the same for every single book of the Bible. Like the book of Leviticus was clearly written by priests from the north, the Levitical priests
Mhm.
that migrated south that wanted to impose their particular practices so that they can support the priesthood.
Sure. Um, okay. It's. I think the main thing I look at is the entire Bible as a cohesive piece. So, you said you don't believe Moses was a historical figure.
I don't see there to be any proof for Moses. It's possible that there's a
Yeah.
Moses like figure. There's somebody that's
Uh,
relatively similar to Moses that started as like the kernel of truth that the mythology was built around. Um,
sure.
but do we have evidence of that Moses? I don't think we do.
Okay. So, um, and the reason I'm putting those two things together, the cohesiveness of the Bible and historicity, is once you look at the historicity and see things like the Brooklyn Papyrus, the Ipuwer Papyrus, and the Sudan inscription talking about the nomads of Yahweh in Egypt, um, and you just go through the Bible and see the historical evidence. So I'm with you on some points. You can't, not every single event is proven, which would be pretty much impossible. But when you see enough throughout 2,000 years of history to say, okay, this seems to be historically reliable. We know archaeologists use this to find artifacts and find areas that they're looking for. We know those facts. So you see a culture for 2,000 years recording history, which is completely within man's ability to do, with or without motive. And then you see them at the same time from the very beginning, from Adam and Eve to Moses, pointing to a future man all the way from the beginning. And I know you just talked about this, the prophecies in the Bible, and I haven't seen your episode on why those are wrong. But when you see those being recorded, like the lamb's blood on the door, and then you see Moses at the same time talking about a future man constantly throughout the Bible, and all these foreshadowings of something that's coming, and then you see the culmination of that in 70 A.D. when, like Jesus talks about, there will be not one stone will be left upon another from the temple, right?
But that's just a snippet of Matthew 24. You're leaving out the more important stuff.
Yeah, but it's okay to take each piece and look at each piece. I mean,
Well,
I think
it's all one
I think
prophecy.
an atheist would be interested to read that passage that said, "Look at this temple; not a single stone will be left on another, and
And
it
what
will happen with
else?
this generation."
Yeah, but what
And
else
then
is
you see,
happening in that prophecy?
oh yes, absolutely. There's definitely other things to look at it all, and look at it
But they
with
didn't come true.
intelligent skepticism. But
So
what I'm saying,
so
but
not only
if
is it more probable that the text was written after the destruction of the temple, but even if it wasn't, that's not a novel
uh,
prediction. If you read the writings in the Talmud, especially the writings on the book of Daniel, they
mm,
were predicting that the temple was going to be demolished again anyways. Like that's nothing new.
right, so they're predicting that it's going to happen um, at the time of the Messiah. So the Messiah is supposed to come in Daniel, and then the temple falls. But sorry, when I'm trying to explain, and it's hard because I have a lot of adrenaline because I'm not, I'm obviously talking to you, a stranger, and stuff like that. So
Well,
they're
let's
reporting.
talk about the one quasi prophecy that you already brought up because I don't want to miss it. You
Yeah,
you
go ahead.
brought up the lamb's blood,
Uh huh.
but that's not a prophecy. That's just a ritual. So like, if
Oh
if I
yeah, by
just
itself, I wouldn't put any significance to that at all. If the writing stopped at Moses and the claim stopped at Moses, it would fit then the description maybe of like a Muhammad or something like that.
I don't think it fits the
Totally.
description of a human being at all. It's not a description of a human. It's a
No, no,
ritual designed to help the Israelites remember what God did for them. It's not a prophecy.
right until you look at it with hindsight is what I'm saying.
No.
So
How do you know that a given text is a typological prophecy?
I think you're I think you'd be allowed to use common sense on that.
I am using
I
common sense, and my common
mean,
sense tells me
no, I
that
mean,
typology is starting at the finish line and then saying that you ran the race.
sure,
So like you can't walk up to an arrow that's been sent to a tree and then draw a target around it, because that's what typological prophecy is. What's the measuring stick?
right.
If I've never read the New Testament, I've never read it ever, and I pick up the Hebrew scriptures, how do I know if any given passage is a typological prophecy?
I don't, I don't know. I mean,
There's nothing. The typological prophecy is the excuse that people made up when they realized Jesus didn't fulfill any actual prophecies. They said, "Oh yeah, but look at these things in the Old Testament that like, we can say that they're quasi related to what we believe about Jesus, but that's silly because I could make up my own. I could just say that when the Christian settlers came over from Europe and we conquered the new Americas, the manifest destiny, that was a typological fulfillment of the Israelites taking over the promised land."
I would no, I wouldn't draw those conclusions.
Why?
But I mean, for Jesus being who he was and being the divine God that he was, you have and you may not believe that the disciples existed either, and their martyrdom was fake for some reason, and maybe you have some kind of motive for that. But I mean, that obviously leads credence to it. I mean, there's the Pontius Pilate inscription showing these were historical figures, these were historical accounts that did happen.
The Pilate inscription or the Pilate letters? Because those are two different things.
The inscription on the stone.
Yeah, we know that Pilate
Yeah,
existed.
yeah. So I'm just it's and maybe I'd like to hear your motive maybe for that account. They took real historical figures and I don't know, maybe you think the disciples did or didn't exist or did or didn't martyred for what they believed and what they saw.
Sure. I mean, we talk about that quite often, but just
Yeah.
to put a kind of a pin in the
Hmm.
prophecy discussion, I've got two claims about the prophecies. One is that typological prophecies is just coping, and number two, even the prophecies that are listed in the New Testament didn't get fulfilled in Jesus. Like the New Testament authors are just taking random out of context quotations and calling it a prophecy. They're just lying. Every
What was the
prophecy from the book of Matthew is just a misapplied random quotation,
okay? What was the reason for that? What was the motive to do that?
because he didn't fulfill any actual prophecies. There are actual prophecies about the Messiah, and he didn't
Uh-huh.
fulfill any of them. So they had to go back and say, okay, what can we find in this text that sounds even
Yeah,
tangentially related to Jesus? And we're just going to call it a prophecy
yeah. That's fine. Say that's true. I'm saying why would they do that?
because they didn't have any other recourse. They rather than admitting that their Messiah failed, they went back to the drawing board and said, okay, how can we make it seem like he didn't fail? And this happens all the time. Every time someone predicts that the end of the world is coming in September and then they get
Uh,
it wrong, their followers so, oh no, he just miscalculated. If you squint hard enough and look at it this way, it turns out that he wasn't actually wrong. He was off by a couple years. And the same thing happens with Jesus. The Messiah failed, and rather than his followers just admitting that he wasn't the actual Messiah, they said, no, but really, if you squint hard enough, it's actually he was supposed to fail.
yeah, but if you say that while you're being tortured to death, I mean, does that leave any credence to it? I mean, does it seems like you're kind of using pure skepticism, which means it would be an impossibility to identify any
What's
truth
your proof
with
that they were tortured to death?
well the what do you mean the accounts? I mean,
What accounts?
with there are extra biblical sources of their accounts of people being brought forth before rulers.
Yep. And who wrote
Yeah,
those?
do what?
Who wrote them?
I don't know.
How long ago were they written? They were written hundreds of years after the event. So you've got the Acts of Paul and Thecla, you've got the Acts
Uh,
of Andrew, you got the Acts of Philip and the Acts of Thomas, all recording a couple of the apostles' death. Doesn't necessarily say they were tortured. They're written hundreds of years later. We have no evidence that any of these people actually died. The only evidence we have is that James, the son of Zebedee, was executed. That's written in the book of Acts. If you believe
Hmm.
Acts is true, I don't. Then we've got also James, the son of Joseph, was possibly, we don't know if it's the same guy, possibly executed according to Josephus. And I don't think
Right.
that's a good conclusion from Josephus. And then the only other two people that we have their deaths that are recorded like within 100 years of Jesus are Paul and Peter. And I think it's possible that Paul and Peter were executed. I think Clement is a more reliable source than some of these other guys. Clement actually lived relatively during the same time period as these people. I mean, he lived like 50 or 60 years after them, but still 50 and 60 years after is not a huge gap.
Sure. Right. But, and this is the problem with pure skepticism, is things like, and I haven't gone into the disciples' deaths as much, but things like Daniel predicting the fall of the temple and predicting that the Messiah will come before the temple. I mean, you
Okay.
can go there today and see and touch the stones.
So back to the prophecies
And
then.
I mean, what I'm saying is, if you have proof of these people are being historically accurate,
Well, they're not.
and then you have to come up with a reason for why they're also from the very beginning recording
But they're not.
this prophetic future person, what the
But they
purpose is of it.
didn't. That's why I keep telling you. Daniel didn't predict Jesus. Daniel was written in the middle of the 2nd century. Everything in the middle of Daniel chapter 9 is about
Uh-huh.
the Antiochus prosecution, Antiochus the Fourth. Everything from Daniel chapter 9 is written about in First Maccabees chapters 2 and 3 and Second Maccabees
I'm
chapter
talking
4.
right. Well, we're talking about Daniel 7, the Son of Man riding on the clouds.
Well, you didn't say Daniel 7. You said the fall of the temple, which is Daniel chapter 9.
R-
I think you're
Right,
having
but
a little bit
I'm
trouble
saying
with
how
chapters.
it's prophesying Jesus is what we're pointing to.
How do you know that
Like,
Jesus
what is
is the fulfillment of Daniel chapter 7?
because prophesying a human God being.
Thank you,
This
Burnett, for the hat.
person, it's a human with the qualities of God, which is, I mean,
No, it's not.
and that's fine. I mean, that's the entire point of pure skepticism. It doesn't
It's
matter
not
what the
pure
Bible
skepticism.
says,
It doesn't
and it
say
doesn't
that.
matter
It
what
doesn't say
history.
the thing that you said it said, is what I'm saying.
Oh, that's a human. The Son of Man appears before God with the qualities of God.
It says, one like the son of a man. And do
Mm-hmm.
you know that that phrase exists in Judaism outside of the book of Daniel?
Well, yeah, of course.
Okay. Do you know that it refers to angelic figures?
Yeah, that would make perfect sense.
So, like
If you look at
Michael and Gabriel are called like the Son of Man as well.
yeah, that would make sense.
Okay, so this is an
It's
angelic figure, not a God man. Do you think angels are God men?
no, but I mean, all throughout the Bible, there's similarities between the description of angels and, I mean, in Revelation, you look at the description of Jesus, and you got the description of God, but also, I mean, you see similarities with that with just any divine being. I mean, there's obviously similarities there.
Yeah.
But
Ave and
but
Brunette, thank you for the hats. I appreciate that. So the angels looked just like mankind. They had arms, they had legs, they ate food, they had mouths, they had eyeballs. In fact, they even consummated with women in Genesis chapter 6. By all accounts, there's no reason to believe that Daniel chapter 7 is about a God man as much as it's just an angel.
okay,
But that being
but
said, even if it
yeah,
was talking about a God man, how would you know
uh,
that Jesus is the God man? He didn't do anything that the Messiah is supposed to do.
well, I mean, you just have to look at the evidence and see
What's the evidence?
of people's actions. Did they follow the path of cult followers and cognitive dissonance, that they didn't really see anything, they didn't really pay any penalty, they just, for some reason, Jews completely went against what their leaders were telling them, and then wrote historically, I mean, they're recording geography correctly in Acts. Paul
So,
is recording who the rulers that he's talking about, and we know that these rulers existed and when
but
they existed. That's why you know that the New
the
Testament was
rulers
written
in the
before Paul.
geography and the Babylonian chronicles are real, but do you believe that Lord Marduk is real?
I think he could be based on a real figure.
No, no, no. The god Marduk, do you think that he exists?
I'm not as familiar with that, but I'm not saying it doesn't. There isn't some points of truth in other ancient texts that could be based on something. But I'm more of the Michael Heiser view of the biblical text is the correction of what humans have observed, and some
Right,
of that is
but do you
absolute
believe that
fiction.
Marduk is real, as the Babylonians describe him?
I'm not familiar with the Marduk description,
Well, Lord
and
Marduk is the high deity within the Babylonian pantheon, and he got there by defeating the chaos monster Yam.
uh,
Do you think that that's true?
well, we're getting. I think that that could be based off reality. I mean, you see pantheon
I'm just
in
asking, do you
Roman
believe that the
theology
Babylonian
and in
mythology is
Christian
true?
theology.
It's just a yes or no.
It's well, it's hard to say. I don't know as much about their description, but it's okay to say that it could be a human description of a divine being, and the biblical description could be the more accurate description directly from that divine being.
Okay, well, we'll
That's
get back to
perfectly
that.
possible.
I got to grab two super chats before they're gone. Dex,
Yeah.
thank you so much for the $5 super. Says, I may be wrong on this, but what we know about Pilate from history is different than what the Bible says about Pilate. I do kind of agree. Some stuff that the Bible says about Pilate doesn't comport to what we find in secular writings about Pilate. And that's certainly a discussion that could be had. And Aaron, thank you so much for the $10 super chat. Aaron says, we are not applying pure skepticism. We are applying proper critical analysis, just like we would with any other text, which is actually the point that I'm making. Thank you, Aaron, for the $10 sub and for the comment. The point that I'm making is that I'm going to apply a certain amount of critical analysis to your text, and you're going to apply that amount of critical analysis to every other text. Like you're going to apply it to the texts that appeal to Lord Marduk and how Marduk rose to be the highest god, even above Enlil. So if that's the case, then why can't you use the same critical analysis of the Bible?
because because you actually have further evidence from the Bible. Like I'm
Like
saying, there's
what?
actual historical lineage from the Bible. With Marduk, you don't have that. The Babylonians are destroyed, and the city of Babylon is completely desolate and empty,
What does the
exactly as
recording of lineage
predicted.
matter? The To be fair,
I
the
think the
lineage of the
best.
Bible, the lineage of the Bible doesn't add up anyways. The lineage of the Bible, if you do the math, means that the
Uh,
Israelites were only in Egypt for 200 years.
okay, but
So why would I trust a lineage given in the Bible when it can't even count its own numbers correctly? It says in 1 Kings chapter 6 that the Israelites were in Egypt for 400. I'm sorry, they were in it.
yeah,
Not 1 Kings chapter 6. I apologize. Genesis chapter 15 says they would be there for 400 years. And then later it said that they were there for 430 years. But if you do the math on the book of Chronicles about how many generations were in Egypt, the maximum you could ever come up with is about 200 years.
okay, that's fine.
So like,
That doesn't negate the Egyptian description of the nomads of Yahweh or the Brooklyn Papyrus with biblical Israeli slave names from 1700 BC in Egypt.
I never
None of that is negated.
I never said that there weren't Semitic speaking people in Israel. I mean, in Egypt.
Right,
That's
with biblical
that.
names following the God of Israel already in the
You mean
wilderness at
Semitic
that time.
names?
No, biblical names.
No, they're Semitic names. Do you know that the biblical Israelites
I,
were Semites?
right,
Do you know that
Semitic names.
they had shared names in that culture?
Correct.
Okay,
I
so
don't.
the biblical people had Semitic
Mhm.
names. Semitic
Yeah,
people were in Egypt. There's no doubt about that. In fact, in two different episodes, they went during the period of the Hyksos from the 1800s, got kicked out in the 1600s. And then
right.
again, there were more that came in later that probably left later, like in the late Bronze Age, during the Bronze Age collapse in like around 1170. So, like, the fact that Semitic speaking people were in and out of Egypt doesn't mean that the Bible is true. That's crazy.
No, not by itself. Absolutely not. That's just one point of evidence.
Okay,
But then you see
but
the
the
nomads of Yahweh named specifically
so what?
nomads of Yahweh, just like they
The
would be at that time in the wilderness. That
Yeah,
makes complete sense.
the Shasu of Yahweh. Yeah, there were people, there were Semitic
Uh-huh.
speaking people that believed in Yahweh that
Hmm.
lived along the border of Egypt. That doesn't mean that the Bible is true.
No, absolutely not. But you just take it case by case, one piece of evidence at a time. That's all. That's all it is. You
But
don't
none of
use
that's
your steps.
evidence. I have the same evidence for the Babylonian gods. I can go and look at the Babylonians' text and say, look, the Babylonians say that they went to war at Carchemish. And then I can look at 10 different other texts and say, oh my God, they did go to battle at Carchemish. That must mean Marduk is real.
Well, of course not.
Uh,
Obviously not.
the Babylonians say when they went in and they attacked Hezekiah, said Hezekiah was so terrified by the radiance of the king that he defecated in his chariot. Do you think that that happened?
It's perfectly possible. That doesn't negate
You
anything.
think
You're
it's
just making.
possible? You don't think
It's
that's
just. It's just.
hyperbole?
You're just being humorous. I mean, that doesn't mean anything. That's
I'm not
not how
being
you do
humorous.
research at all.
I've done the research. That's why I'm trying to tell you that every argument that you're making, I can make for the Babylonian pantheon. Every single one. All you're saying is that because there are some historical artifacts in the Bible, that means the mythology of the Bible is true. But I can give you historical artifacts from the Serapis cult. That doesn't mean that Serapis is real.
Right, but I'm just saying at a starting point, you just say this is a historical text, just like exactly the same way that I would look at the Book of Mormon. It's supposed to be an ancient text. So you look in those areas at the see if there's archaeological evidence. For the Book of Mormon, it's completely disproven just from that point alone.
Right,
But
but
when
the
you're
Book
on,
of Mormon's clearly just a work of fiction. Like
yeah,
the guy
right,
who wrote
absolutely,
it
but
was a trickster. Like his whole goal was to trick people. That's why
yeah,
like 3/4 of his 11 witnesses turned on him like within years.
yeah, we're in complete agreement on that.
Yes.
Absolutely,
But that
yeah.
being said,
So
the
I'm
Bible's
just
not
saying
too
that
far off. The
at the
stuff that's in the Bible is
first.
not believable either. And the reason why I don't believe it is because I can find blatant lies in the Bible. Like what percentage of the Bible needs to be false before you just say, "Hey, this thing's not trustworthy"?
What, before we keep skipping around, this is why it's so difficult to come to any conclusion because
Skipping
you're,
around, I
you're
just asked you a simple question because you're talking about, well, there's a couple things in the Bible that are historically reliable, therefore everything in the Bible is true. But I don't think that's a good
that's
talking
how
point.
slow you have to take research. If I'm an atheist watching your show, and if you keep skipping around so much, you can never come to a logical conclusion this way. This
You're
is
the one
not how you do
skipping around from
research at all.
topic to topic. I've tried to pin you down on a single topic and then you keep pivoting. I tried to talk
I'm
about the
sorry.
prophecies
Part of
and
that
then
is the adrenaline
you
from
pivoted
you're
away
used to.
twice on prophecies. So I'll just ask you a simple question. If the
Yeah.
Bible says a bunch of stuff that is untrue, then how
Hmm.
do I know that the Bible can be trusted?
Well, yeah, I would weigh that against what is true. I mean, and first of all, there's what isn't true. I mean, we obviously that is so subjective. I mean, you and I could look at the same exact information and come to completely different conclusions, just like
Want to
a
try one?
prophecy. It doesn't matter if there was a prophecy in Daniel about the temple and then it was fulfilled in 70 AD and you can go touch the stones today. That doesn't it won't matter to a pure skeptic. It doesn't matter if
I'm
you can
not a
touch the
pure skeptic. I have
stones.
no idea why you keep saying that. So I'm applying logic
Yeah.
and reason to your book that you're not willing to do. So 1 Kings chapter 6 says that the Exodus happened 480 years prior to the building of Solomon's temple. Do you know when Solomon's temple was started?
No.
About
I mean,
970. All right.
okay.
So that means the Exodus, according to 1 Kings, would have been around 1450. And it says
Uh-huh.
in both Genesis and Exodus that the Pharaoh at the time, or at least part of the time, would have been Ramses. We assume Ramses II because it says that they built the storehouses of Pithims and Ramses in Exodus chapter 1, verse 11. So based on the text, that means Ramses must have existed while they were in Egypt. But in fact, that's impossible because according to the timeline given by the Bible, Ramses didn't exist for another 200 years. He reigned from about 1279 to 1225.
Okay.
So like we have all this conflicting data with the Bible that would lead me to believe that it's not true. Job 38:14 says that the earth is shaped like clay beneath a seal, which is a flat disc, which ironically is how everybody thought the world was shaped back then. It says elsewhere
Yeah,
that there's a dome over top of the earth, which everyone believed back then is clearly not true. There's lots of things in the Bible that aren't true. Jacob actually
mhm.
stripped some poplar sticks so that they would be striped, and then mated a bunch of herd animals before it. And because they mated in front of the striped poles, they produced striped offspring. That's not how reproduction works.
True. Yeah.
It says that rabbits and rock badgers chew cud. They don't. Rock badgers physiologically lack the ability to even to regurgitate. They can't even throw up.
Okay.
Deuteronomy chapter 22 says that women who don't bleed should be executed. If the first time they do the deed on their wedding night, there's no blood on the sheet, they should be executed. But only about half of women bleed their first time. Over and over again, the Bible fails to test.
Is is the is the Brooklyn Papyrus? I'm willing to give you all those because they're so specific and so niche. I would obviously have to look into these. So I'm willing to give you those. Okay, to say it's incorrect in those ways. I think that's fair because it's obviously we can't just delve into it right now. Is it fair to say that if you're starting the investigation, you look at, and I'm just trying to stick on one topic, the Brooklyn Papyrus, and it's saying, yes, these Semitic people with these biblical names, and I say biblical because like Moses's mom had the same name, so it was recorded also in the Bible. I'm not saying it came from the Bible. I'm just saying the same names. The were slaves in that region. Are you willing to say that that would be a plus one in the column for the Bible?
What's the name of Moses' mother?
Was it Miriam,
That's his sister.
the sister? What was his mom's name?
I don't know if it's actually given.
Okay, but
So, but
but that's what I'm saying. Are we willing to admit
it
like
might
are
be
we?
given in Chronicles. Hold on.
Yeah.
It should be given in Exodus chapter 6 too. There's a chronology in Exodus chapter 6, but I don't know if it's given there. Let's see. She does show up in yes, she does show up in Exodus chapter 6. And
Okay.
her name is Jochebed. So you're saying
Okay.
that Jochebed shows up in the Brooklyn Papyrus?
It's either is it her name or is it his sister's name?
Well, if it's
If I'm
Miriam,
remembering that
that's an
right.
incredibly common name. That's like one of the most
Yeah, yeah,
common names of the time period.
that's completely fine. The entire
You think the
validity
name
of the
Miriam showing up in the Brooklyn Papyrus is evidence of the Exodus?
this is where it goes totally off the rails. You don't look at one tiny piece of evidence and then say it's right. There's stuff that the Book of Mormon gets correct,
Yeah,
but you don't say you got 1 point right and then say, oh, it must all be right. You look at it all as a whole.
I know, which is why I
I'm just
reject the Book of Mormon as well.
Yeah. I'm just asking. Do you give it any credence at all? If you find a shred of evidence, are you willing to say, okay, that's a plus one? That doesn't mean the Bible's true,
Yeah,
but
I'll tell you exactly what's true in the Bible. Gen X Stream, thank you so much for the $6.66 super chat. Big W says history and historical accuracy is garbage evidence for the supernatural, which is the point that I've been trying to make.
no, and I agree. I
let me
agree with you.
let me finish what Gen X is saying because Gen X and
Yeah.
I are trying to say the same thing. Also, Aaron, big W for gifting 50 memberships on YouTube. Holy shit. You just doubled my membership. Thank you so much, Aaron. I really appreciate the support. And for everyone who got memberships, you should have access to the goodies. So, okay. So the point that we're getting at here is that a book can have things that are true. It might say, for
Yeah.
example, that so-and-so went to a particular city. Well, shit, it might be true that so-and-so went to a particular city, and it might be true that that city actually exists. Now, if it says that so-and-so went to that city and then their God appeared to them, that's not evidence that their God appeared to them because you wouldn't accept that claim about any other book. You would only accept it about the Bible.
Well, you would need other evidence with it. That's what I'm saying.
What's the other evidence?
If the
Because the
Bible was
only evidence you've given me so far is that there are some names that exist and some cities that are real. But I can find the same thing. I've got I've got a whole library of Babylonian texts about real people who existed in real history that said they did real things that actually happened. And then they also said that their God communicated with them. For example, the law code of Hammurabi is quite literally there's a litany of deities that Hammurabi claims spoke the laws to him. The fact that Hammurabi existed and his law code is real doesn't mean that the gods that he worshipped gave him the law code. Also, thank you, Bitch Lizard, for sending the star map. I appreciate that.
Right, I completely agree. If the Bible was told completely historically true, that doesn't mean by itself that it wouldn't give proof to supernatural claims. We're totally in agreement on that.
Right.
Right.
Okay,
The
so the historical claims don't mean anything to me. Like, we know that the Babylonians and the Assyrians went to war with the Israelites. We know that. That's not a question.
Right.
None of these are special, but those don't validate the evidence of their God, because if the historicity of the Babylonian invasion proves that Yahweh is real, then by the same virtue, it would prove that the gods of Babylon are real too, because they have the same texts describing the same event, attributing it to their gods.
Sure, of course. That's the historical evidence goes in one column. There are many columns. So you look at, okay, so it is true that these people did exist for over thousands of years, and they were recording history correctly. Okay, that's completely fine. That doesn't give any credence to a supernatural event. But from the very beginning, Moses is directly saying there's a prophet coming after me,
Joshua.
and they don't. No, Moses said that.
Yeah, no,
He said
it was Joshua though.
Okay, I could be wrong. I'm pretty sure it was Moses who said, "There's a prophet like me that is coming."
Yeah, and that was fulfilled in Joshua, is what I'm saying.
Right, and then you have the king priest David. I mean, there are so many foreshadows, and then there are specific.
But again, what is a foreshadow, and how do you know it? You're starting at the finish line. You're saying, because I believe in Jesus, I also believe in foreshadowings. I don't believe in Jesus. There's no metric. There's no tool that I can apply to the Old Testament to know if something is a foreshadowing.
Okay, I don't understand how you apply that to the Daniel 7 saying the destruction of the temple happens after the Messiah comes.
That's Daniel chapter 9. I don't know why you keep getting mixed. There's no destruction of a temple in Daniel 7.
No, right. I agree. I'm just talking about the prophecy about the temple, because that's something physical that we can.
The prophecy in Daniel chapter 9 is a prophecy written in post. It's written in the middle of the 2nd century during the Maccabean revolt, when the temple has already been desecrated by Antiochus Epiphanes IV. Everything that it says in that chapter had already happened. It's written in a form of Hebrew that wasn't even in existence until after the fall of that temple. I'm sorry, until after Antiochus.
Okay. And that's...
We don't have any pre-exilic biblical Hebrew of Daniel.
That's... Okay, I'm trying to figure out let's say, if I'm trying to put myself in your shoes. If I was an atheist using your rules, how could, if prophecy did exist, how could I be able to identify that, is what I'm trying to see. Well, because they're all through the Old Testament, they're specifically pointing to a man, a person also.
Yes, the Messiah was supposed to be a person. I agree. Mm-hmm. It's supposed to be a king. So we know what a prophecy is. A prophecy is when a text says, God spoke to me and he told me that X, Y, and Z is going to happen. That is a prophecy. That's why Deuteronomy chapter 18 says that if you think that a prophet has spoke presumptuously and that it's not a word that God said, then you must test them to see if the thing comes true. A prophecy is something that's testable, that you can see if it comes true.
Right.
So by definition, Daniel would count as a prophecy. The problem with Daniel is that it was clearly written after the actual events happened, and the events happened in the middle of the 2nd century. But we have other prophecies like that Jesus supposedly fulfilled that we know were written before Jesus. Those are the ones we should be looking at. The ones that were written before Jesus, and then we should ask ourselves, did Jesus fulfill these prophecies? And I think the clear answer is no. I don't think he fulfilled any of the Messianic prophecies. And I'm going to give you a very good example of why I know that he didn't. So I'm going to show you a couple prophecies from the book of Matthew and maybe even John. And
Yeah.
I'm going to demonstrate to you why they're just lying to your face. And then I'm going to show you some actual messianic prophecies. And when I show you the actual messianic prophecies, you're going to say, oh, he didn't do that yet. He's going to do that when he comes back, because we know he didn't actually do any of the messianic prophecies. Before we start reading, let me read a super chat from Gen X Streamer. Thank you so much for the $10 super chat. It says, "Do Justin, ask for your best evidence. If you even if you agree history, only one piece, isn't good evidence for the supernatural, why don't you lead with the other piece that is?" I agree. If history is not good evidence, we should probably eschew the history discussion and provide a better discussion. And I think prophecy, to be honest, is a better discussion. So let's.
Yeah, Justin, can I make that point real quick?
Yep.
It's just the historical claims are the easiest to look at and prove or disprove, just like the Book of Mormon.
Sure.
That's where it's easy. So I'm just saying that's the starting point of evidence of there is credence here that this did happen.
Right.
Since
But
they're not writing in a fictional style like the Bhagavad Gita or something about a fictional battle about God's doing stuff. They're writing in they're saying this is historical. This is a historical record. This is real. This is not fiction. Mythology.
Right. But they keep getting history wrong in the historical record, which means to me it's just something written by men and not directed by God. If it was directed by God, they would get stuff right.
I don't think that's a fair assertion if archaeologists use the Bible to find real world events. I don't think that's fair to say, well, the Bible's just always wrong.
I didn't say it was always wrong. You made that up. I said the Bible gets things wrong. If the Bible was from God, I would expect that it didn't get things wrong.
Yeah, I think we as humans have the picture of, just like Joseph Smith's followers did, of if a book was divine, it would be written in gold and descend from the heavens.
I didn't say that.
I'm just saying, I think that's the picture we have.
That's not my picture.
That's the reason Joseph Smith used that view to convince people.
That's not my claim. My claim is that if the book is from God, I would expect it to say things that are true, not things that are untrue. I don't care how it was delivered. I just care that it says things that are true. So let's read Jeremiah 31:15 and 16. It says, "Thus saith the Lord, a voice is heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping. Rachel is weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children because they are no more. Thus saith the Lord, keep your voice from weeping and your eyes from tears. For there is a reward for your work, says the Lord. They shall come back from the land of the enemy." Now, what event is Jeremiah writing about here?
I don't know. I'm listening. Go ahead.
Well, he's writing about the Babylonian exile. In fact, just a couple chapters prior, in chapter 25, he says that they're going to be in exile for 70 years, and then they're going to come back. Jeremiah was the weeping prophet because he's the one that witnessed his city get destroyed and his people get carried away. So he's saying that the women that are watching their children get carried away, that are crying and they're in bitter tears, you don't have to worry because they will come back from the land of the enemy. It seems pretty clear, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think there's anything difficult there. Okay. So the prophecy is clearly about the return of the exiles, right?
Yes, but just like Isaiah 53 and in other prophetic passages, it seems to wind in and out of prophetic and non-prophetic passages.
It was prophetic. I just told you. It said that they're going to come back from the land of the enemy. That's a prophecy. It's a very specific prophecy. Okay. He says they're going to come back from the land of the enemy, right?
Right. Sorry, I think I'm thinking ahead of how that would relate to the temple prophecy.
We're not talking about the temple. Okay.
So yeah, go ahead.
Matthew 2:18 through 19. Actually, we'll start in 17. When it talks about the babies in Bethlehem being executed, it says, "Then what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation. Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled because they are no more." So Matthew's just taking a random prophet quotation out of context and saying that, oh, this was fulfilled when the babies in Bethlehem got executed. It's not about the babies being executed. It's about the children being deported, the people being deported in exile and coming back.
Okay.
So Matthew's lying to you. And now you might say, well, listen, Matthew, you're out of pocket on this one. But every prophecy that Matthew quotes is just like this. Every single prophecy is just a random, out of context quotation. And I know this because I read and studied every single one of them.
Yeah, that's fine. It's to viewers who are listening, it's going to be extremely difficult to. It doesn't matter if the Bible's true when you're evaluating
It
it this way.
does.
That's the problem here. Is that if you just put it on a simple Excel spreadsheet, take everything you can try to find wrong with it, and obviously some of this is subjective. But actually try to find the things that are true about it. Like I'm
I
saying,
have.
the historical claims.
I have.
Because,
How much of the Bible has to be wrong before I say it's not from God?
I'm just, we're honestly you're covering some subjects that I'm just not. I mean, we would have to go over deeper. I mean, these little quick, shallow readovers
We can
are,
go
and
as
I'm
deep
totally
as you
fine.
want. I know the
No, I'm
text very
totally fine
well.
with. I'm giving you. If you're claiming that, I'm giving it to you. But it doesn't fit the pattern. You can see the patterns
What pattern?
of like what would you call the Book of Mormon, like cult readings or the Bhagavad Gita. There can be some truth in it. You just put the truth in the false column, and you look at each one, the historicity of it, the prophetic part of it, and every other part, the motive part of it.
Yes, that's
The
what I've
Bible comes
done.
out headed.
I put things in the true and the false column. It's true that the Israelites existed. It's
Mm-hmm.
true that they went to war with the Assyrians, the Moabites, the Ammonites, and even possibly some of them came out of Egypt. I can
Yeah,
put those
and
in the true column, but the other
that by itself
claims,
does not support supernatural
the
claiming.
other claims are untrue. The claims about the universe, the shape of the world, about how biology works, about how female anatomy works, about Jesus fulfilling prophecies. I can put those in the false category. And because I know that Jesus isn't the actual Messiah, that means I can put the Messiah category completely away. Because if he's not the Messiah, I don't have to care about anything in the New Testament.
It's okay. Sorry. Let me try to explain this really quick. It's difficult for me. In the same way that this is going to sound out of left field, but the reason I keep going back to the historical claims is in the same way that the producers and directors are made the Avengers series. They started from this is our plan at the end, so we build the series so we know the starting point of the series to get to the end point. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's what Christianity
In,
does.
in
It starts with the
right,
end point and builds backwards. Yeah.
but in the same way, you see a third party outside of human experience, starting with there's an endpoint who is Jesus, who is the Lamb of God. So from there, you start from the beginning to writings before Jesus existed, thousands of years before Jesus existed. People are talking about without a full picture of what's going on. Lamb's blood in the hill of Shalom, which became Jerusalem.
But that's
And
not a
you
prophecy.
talk about you talk about Abraham's son going up to the mountain
That's
and
not
not
a
being
prophecy either.
right. It can't
You're
be. I'm
just
sure
inventing prophecies.
it'd be impossible to be. I'm just saying, what is the motive for all these things being done? It's using real historical events to point to a future Messiah.
Well,
But
first of all, I
the
don't believe
problem,
all those are historical events. But second of
and,
all, I don't
and that's totally
believe
fine. I'm
that the
just
Old Testament is typologically fulfilling anything or predicting anything because I can do the same thing. I can say that I fulfilled Isaiah 65:9, where it says that I will bring forth descendants. Did I fulfill Isaiah 65:9?
but you can't control where you were born or
Doesn't
any of these.
matter.
It does
Jesus,
matter. These are the kind of things
Jesus,
that Jesus
Jesus,
fulfilled.
and John the Baptist did the same exact thing. It says that John the Baptist is the one crying out in the wilderness. How in the world could you possibly test that John the Baptist is the fulfillment of that prophecy?
Why even have the prophecy though? That's the
Exactly.
problem.
Yeah.
You don't even look at the motives of any of this. You're just
The
like
the motives are irrelevant.
humans.
I care if it's
Humans.
true.
There's one example in human history of humans coming together and doing this, predicting the future, and you can go to the literal temple site and touch the stones that are sitting on the ground
I don't
from
care.
that predicted in Daniel and Jesus predicted.
That's
And King
irrelevant to me. Daniel didn't
in the
predict
timeline that it was
Daniel
supposed,
Daniel didn't predict Jesus though.
it's that's completely subjective. I mean,
Daniel said that there would be two different messiahs in chapter 9, two of them. There is no singular Messiah in Daniel chapter 9. There is a first Messiah who's an actual ruler who does rule after the first week. And then there's another Messiah who's not a ruler who gets cut off after the 62nd week. It's clearly referring to Joshua the high priest or Zerubbabel. And then the second one is Onias III. Everything in Daniel chapter 9 was fulfilled in the middle of the 2nd century and prior to that. Everything in Daniel chapter 9 is written in post, pretending to be prophecy.
Of course, pretending to be prophecy. These people had a motive to do all this pretending for thousands of years.
Yes.
For thousands of years, all this work, sacrificing their own lives for pretending.
What,
I mean, it just...
Do you understand what apocalyptical literature, what the motive is?
There is no...
Do you know what the motive of apocalyptical literature is?
No, sorry. Go ahead.
The goal of the apocalyptical genre is to say, I know things are really bad right now, but if you hold on just a little bit longer, God is going to fix everything, and here's how he's going to do it. The problem is those predictions never come true. So I'm not imputing the motives of whoever compiled the book of Daniel, but the book of Daniel is clearly not a prophecy about the time of Jesus. Daniel chapter 9 is clearly referring to 539 when Cyrus set the people free. That's the word that went out. Also, Sarah, welcome in over on TikTok. Sarah, can you hear the guest from YouTube, or can you only hear me?
I cannot, no.
All right, we'll have to work on that. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
All right, so nothing in Daniel chapter 9 was fulfilled in Jesus. Even if you believe it was written before the 2nd century, it's clearly talking about events in the 2nd century. That being said, Daniel chapter 9 gets a lot of shit wrong too. It says that the child of Nebuchadnezzar is going to be Belshazzar, but that's not the child of Nebuchadnezzar. That's the child of King Nabonidus, about 4 different kings later, not even related to Nebuchadnezzar.
Okay. Like I said, we're getting into really, really specific topics. I mean, we'd have to dive into each one of these topics. It hurts that I don't know.
Yeah. Every time I tell you where the book gets something wrong, you just say, well, that's really specific. I know it's really specific. That's why I know it's wrong.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. It's that when you're claiming things, it's wrong because why? Because a historian, this is his view of how history went. And I'm not claiming on this. I've seen that so many times. Well, the Egyptian timeline that the Bible has can be right because we already know exactly what it is. And it turns out you don't know exactly what it is.
Yeah, but we know exactly the lineage of both those kings. Both of those kings left chronicles of their life and their lineage. And it turns out that there was never a Belshazzar or anyone close to that was born to Nebuchadnezzar. And it also turns out that King Nabonidus was probably the origin story of Nebuchadnezzar going wild for 7 years, because King Nabonidus literally did kind of lose his mind for a period of about 7 years, and he left his kingdom and the kingdom fell apart. And then he converted to a different religion while he was away. And not only that, we find a parallel story to this in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It parallels the Daniel narrative, but it's about Nabonidus. So the story was originally about Nabonidus, and somebody came along later and changed it to Nebuchadnezzar because they have no idea what they're doing.
Oh, of course. Right. I mean, that's the skepticism. Wait, I'm sorry. Did you say Belshazzar didn't really exist, but the Bible claims he did?
Belshazzar was the child of King Nabonidus. We know that not just from Nabonidus' own writings, but also from palace inscriptions. Not even that. We've got receipts from the palace stating that he is the son of King Nabonidus. We have writings from his own... We have writings from the mother of Nabonidus. We have her own writings, poems and songs that she wrote telling about her different family lineage.
That's fine. I was asking, did you say the Bible claims someone existed, but he didn't really exist?
No, the Bible claims that Belshazzar is the child of Nebuchadnezzar, but it's not true.
That's fine.
Because Daniel, whoever wrote Daniel, was living in the 2nd century. They didn't have a clue about what was happening during the supposed time of Nebuchadnezzar. That's why they keep getting details wrong. That's why Darius the Mede isn't a real person. They got the wrong guy. Darius, the king, came along after Nebuchadnezzar. So we've got these details from the time of the supposed Daniel that aren't wrong. But when we go to what they say about the second century, things happening in the second century, they
Hmm.
nail it. They get everything in the second century right up until the battle of Judas Maccabeus. They predicted something would happen after that battle, and it didn't really happen because this was written in the middle of the battle. And that is the purpose of apocalyptical literature. When shit's going down and things are bad, you need to shore up your troops and reassure them that finally God's going to come through.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. But here's the problem with that, and that works for that generation and maybe a few generations after that.
Yeah.
What doesn't work is what comes for 1,000 years before that and for 1,000, 2,000 years after that. That's the problem, is that with that explanation.
Yeah,
I'm
that's why the
told
Jews didn't want to canonize it. Are you realize
if,
that most of the Orthodox Jews of the time period didn't want to canonize Daniel?
no, because it's not pertinent to the conversation. What I'm
It
saying
is.
is
I'm saying that
if
Daniel
that
has
exists,
always been a suspect book.
I'm saying if that existed by itself, I'm totally willing to go with the motive of it was to um, give the Israelites hope at that time for their people. That's completely fine. The problem is you have thousands of years of history after that.
What about it?
Is what I'm saying. They kept writing from a source kept giving them more information, and then you see Jesus is gone. Once the disciples stop writing, all of a sudden the Jews have no more information to write. They have no. I understand the Talmud and stuff came later, but it's just giving good advice. I mean, there's no connection to the biblical scripture, even
I
though
have
they
no
claim
idea what
it.
you're talking about. None of this supports the
Right.
theory that Jesus is the Messiah. So I think maybe we should read some more prophecies because I want to show you some prophecies that are actually messianic and not prophecies that are like, well, there's a foreshadowing, because all that's meaningless to me. Let's go
Yeah, of
to
course. That's the whole point.
Jeremiah 33. Jeremiah 33 says, "The days are surely coming, says the Lord, when I will fulfill the promise I made to the house of Israel and the house of Judah. In those days and at that time, I will cause a righteous branch to spring up for David, and he will execute justice and righteousness in the land." We agree that's the Messiah, right? The branch from David?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
It says, "In those days, Judah will be saved and Jerusalem will live in safety." Did Jesus rescue Israel from their enemies?
Is that? I mean, that could be talking about. Is it talking about the future? I mean, we just don't know. That's the entire point. If you, what is
It
the
says the
what
days are
is the
surely coming when he's going to fulfill the promise. The
yeah
promise that there's going to be someone from the line of David that
uh,
rescues Israel from their enemies.
right.
But Jesus didn't do any of that. And it goes even further. Verse 17, "Thus saith the Lord, David shall never lack a man to sit on the throne of the house of Israel, and the Levitical priests shall never lack a man in my presence to offer burnt offerings, to make grain offerings, and to make sacrifices for all time." This
Mhm.
completely invalidates the whole message of the gospel that Jesus is replacing the Levitical priesthood, according to Hebrews chapter 7, that was imperfect and needed to be done away with. But according to the actual messianic prophecies, it says that there's always going to be Levitical sacrifices.
Yeah, but it says that the earthly sacrifices that temple system was a shadow of the real thing. That was not
Yeah, that's how I know
the
it's a
real thing.
lie.
I mean, it says in Hebrews that he's the new priest, that he's immortal. You're
Yes,
not.
that's how I know that Hebrews is a lie, because it contradicts the Old Testament prophecies. It says that
Right.
when the Messiah comes, there will always be a king on the throne, and there will always
Mhm.
be Levitical sacrifices, which means Hebrews is wrong or Jeremiah is wrong. You got to pick one.
What is that? What does sacrifices mean? I mean,
He tells you
if the
burnt,
reality
burnt
is in
offerings,
if the reality is in heaven,
burnt offerings,
right? I can't.
and grain offerings. Are you aware that burnt offerings and grain offerings are specific types of offerings?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, and he says those are going to happen forever.
Yeah. Do you know what happens in the heavenly realm? I certainly don't.
Certainly not
But
burnt offerings.
Are you sure of that? You've
Where's
been
the
there
fire?
to see that. What do you mean? Where's the fire?
How are they igniting fire? Because according to the New Testament, you're not even going to be able to marry in heaven. How are you going to have a fire?
Why would those two things be? Why would fire depend on you being able to get married?
Because the New Testament says that the kingdom is not of flesh and blood, although I think that's a contradiction of other passages. So here's the problem. Who's offering the sacrifices according to Jeremiah?
Would it be the priest or?
It says the Levitical priests, yeah. The Levitical priests will never lack a man in my presence to offer burnt offerings and to make grain offerings. This completely negates the need for the gospel. The whole gospel message is that the sacrifices needed to be ended. They were temporary, they were imperfect, and that they're no longer necessary. This disagrees with that.
Right. The earthly sacrifices are no longer necessary. What's wrong with that?
Because it contradicts Jeremiah.
But you're claiming to know what happens in heavenly realms if they do exist. I mean,
no, it's a contradiction of the theology. There's no need for burnt offerings and grain offerings if Jesus died for your sins and he was the final sacrifice. He can't be the final sacrifice if the actual sacrifices are happening over and over again forever.
But he's still claiming to be the high priest and king at the same time.
He says he replaced the order of the Levites.
Yeah.
But here it says the Levites will be offering sacrifices forever, which contradicts what the book of Hebrews says.
But it says in Exodus, I'm going to make you kings and priests, and then you see the fulfillment of that in Revelation. I have made you now kings and priests. So
Did
for
it
some
happen?
reason, in Revelation, I have made you. I mean, it's talking.
No,
what I'm guessing is future events. I'm not.
Yeah,
I'm honestly not set in stone on how future.
That's right.
What happened in future and past, because so much of it seems to be have been fulfilled in 70 AD.
It doesn't matter what Revelation says. Revelation didn't come true.
Jesus said, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, run for the hills. And
Revelation didn't come true. So you can't say that Revelation is a fulfillment of anything from the Old Testament, since it never came true. According to you, Revelation will come true later, which means you can't use it as a fulfillment.
Well, I'm honestly, as a Christian, I'm not sure if it's future or if it happened in 70 AD, because so much of what was prophesied happened in 70 AD. I mean,
none of it
Jesus,
did.
like I'm saying, Jesus said, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, run for the hills.
Yeah, you know where that quotation comes from?
Is it Luke?
No. You know where Jesus got that saying from?
Yeah, would that be also Daniel or a different one?
He got it from the book of Maccabees. That's a direct quote from the book of Maccabees. Retelling the same event about Antiochus IV coming into Jerusalem and waging war against Jerusalem and the temple. So
okay, that's fine. And then 70 AD, you see, it did happen, though.
Yeah, I know. And the Gospels were written.
And that's what doesn't make sense to me about.
The Gospels were written when?
They had to be before 70 AD.
They weren't.
Paul himself claims to be preached. He said, "I remember when I did preach to you during this." I have it written down, but it may stop the feed.
What's the earliest
during
gospel?
His time, and that was what, 54 AD.
What's the earliest gospel?
The earliest gospel? I'm not sure, but
the Gospel of Mark. And who's
Mark? Why would you? I'm just saying. I think we can ask the question: why would you record history accurately and many times? I'm not even disagreeing you on what it says it's wrong about. Why would you record history for 2,000 years accurately and then stop before 70 AD and never record the fall of Jerusalem?
Why would you not record history accurately? You keep assuming that the Bible is historically accurate, and I keep demonstrating that it's not, but you're still missing the point. The prophecy about the temple being fallen was written after the temple actually fell.
Right. Let's not leave that point. For an atheist to be true, for that to be right, it has to be written. To be right? For atheism to be correct on the Christian side, it has to be written after 70 AD.
No, it doesn't.
Because if it was written...
No, atheism can be wrong and your religion can still be wrong. It could be true that another religion is right. It could be true that a God exists and it's just not your God.
But we both know that the Gospels had to be written after 70 AD for the atheistic worldview to be true. Because if not...
No,
because
wrong again.
If not, then it leads credence to...
No, you're missing the point. Correct. Even if Christianity was wrong, it doesn't mean atheism's true. It could be
No,
that another God exists.
I agree with you. That's not the point we're talking about. The point we're talking about is you have there's obviously an incentive to say that the Gospels were written after 70 AD in spite of the facts, in spite
So
of.
I'm just not honest.
No,
I'm
I'm
lying.
saying
I'm up here lying to you. I'm dishonest.
I'm saying we both have an incentive to.
Well, what's the evidence that they were written before the temple?
Well, Paul's saying I wrote these earlier letters in the Bible during would have been in the 50s, I think, 50s AD.
Paul didn't write the Gospels.
I'm sorry, I'm talking about the New Testament. I'm saying the entire New Testament was written before 70 AD.
It wasn't.
That's great.
There's no
Listener,
evidence of that. You can claim it all you want. There's no evidence of that.
Why would you record your everyday comings and goings, what towns you travel to, what countries you travel to, but not record the biggest event in Jewish history in 1,000 years? Why would you not do that?
Because it didn't happen. That's why no one recorded it. So we'll try this from the beginning.
Oh wait, are you saying the temple didn't fall in 70 AD or what?
No, the temple did fall. The temple is irrelevant to whether or not Jesus is the Messiah. Every Jew in
it's not irrelevant.
Every Jew in the first century believed that the temple was going to fall eventually. That's a dumb claim. It means nothing to me. If by virtue,
it was prophesied in Daniel, that's why they were saying that.
If by virtue of the temple falling means that Jesus is the Messiah, then you also have to believe that Simon Bar Kokhba was the Messiah, because Simon Bar Kokhba and his followers believed the same thing.
Right, but Simon Bar Kokhba didn't change the world.
I don't care.
You don't care.
It doesn't matter if he had followers. It only matters that he predicted something.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Even that evidence can't be accepted in pure skepticism. The fact
I'm not a pure skeptic. I'm telling you the problem with your book, and you can't handle it.
The fact that Jesus' sacrifice can change the entire history of the world.
It didn't change anything. Constantine changed it, and Theodosius II. When they mandated everybody in the kingdom follow it. Your religion was spread by the sword, just like Islam.
Spread by the sword.
Your religion was spread by the sword, just like Islam.
How did it reach Constantine? Did it reach Constantine by the sword? Did someone hold a sword of Constantine's throat and force him to be a Christian?
No, his mother was a Christian, and he was sympathetic towards both his mother and the religion.
It reached Rome through martyrs sacrificing of themselves, of what they believed to be true, and what they saw with their own eyes being true.
Yeah, Christianity had adherents, yes. And then after it gained popularity in Rome, it was spread by the sword, just like I said. But none of that's actually relevant, because it doesn't demonstrate that it's true. Because if something being popular means that it's true...
Let's go back to that. As Christianity was...
If something being popular means that it's true, then it must also be true that the Islamic faith will be the right faith once Muhammad and his followers surpass the Christians. Do you think that once there are more Muslims than Christians, that means Islam is true?
Of course not. You apply the exact same research.
So ad populum, it doesn't work. It's a bad argument.
You apply the same test to Islam as you do to the Bible. Islam follows the exact profile of a cult leader.
So does the Bible.
If it had stopped maybe at Moses, then maybe so, but not for 2,000 years. It can't. A cult leader can't predict the future of what's going to happen. It can't predict that Cyrus is going to be king one day.
But they didn't predict the future. They got the future wrong at every turn. I've got hundreds of failed prophecies I can go through with the Bible. Hundreds of them.
So Jews are waiting for the temple to fall in the first century.
Jesus couldn't even get his own second coming right. Have you read Matthew 16, Matthew 10, Matthew 24?
Sure. Of course, but it depends on... I'm not claiming to even know the correct interpretation. That's something I struggle with completely as a Christian.
Well, the interpretation's not hard. It's just the words mean what the words mean. He says the Son of Man is to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay everyone for what's been done. Truly, I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. And let me guess, you're going to say that happened in 70 AD?
No, that's confusing. I'm being honest as a Christian. That is confusing.
It's not confusing for me. You want to know why it's not confusing? Because he tells you in Matthew chapter 5 exactly what it means to come with his angels in the glory of his Father. If you go down to 31 and 32, He quite literally says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory with all the angels with him, he will sit on the throne of glory. And then what does he do? He judges mankind. This is not an unclear reference. We know what it means to come with the angels and to judge mankind. It's the second coming.
Sure.
And it didn't happen.
That's fine. The example we have from the Old Testament is that any prophecy is going to be fuzzy and it's not going to be understood until it is fulfilled. I mean,
no, I disagree with that.
That's the example we have from the Old Testament. They had.
I disagree.
I mean, the Dead Sea Scrolls have selected Messianic verses picked out, saying we're waiting for this person to show up.
So
he shows up in Jerusalem fulfills those exact verses. What are you talking?
He didn't. Show me one prophecy he fulfilled. You can't do it. I'll bet you money. I'll pay you $100 over Venmo tonight if you can show me one prophecy in the Bible Jesus fulfilled. Why is it so hard? He fulfilled 300 of them. Just find me one.
Because
you know he didn't do it. You're going to point to things that aren't even prophecies.
Well, no, I'm trying to see what can be even looked at as a prophecy with the mind of a skeptic, and I'm just not sure. Without a videotape, how can you know anything?
It's not the mind of a skeptic that's the problem. A prophecy is when someone says X, Y, and Z will happen, and then it happens.
Right, like being born in Bethlehem or...
Okay, so Micah 5. You want to go to Micah 5?
Sure.
Okay, Micah 5 is going to cook you. You're not going to like this one. I'll put it on the screen, although you can't see it, but I think everyone else can see it.
Okay.
Actually, I might be able to share it with you. Hold on. Give me 1 second, see if I can share my screen with you. I can share my browser with you. Can you see it now?
Yeah, I can.
Has it got the Bible verse on it?
Yes.
Cool. Okay. It says, but you, O Bethlehem of Ephrathah, who are of the little clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to rule in Israel, whose origin is from old, from ancient days. Did Jesus rule in Israel?
Mm-hmm. One who is to rule. Yeah.
Okay, so when did he rule in Israel?
One is coming from Israel, one who is to rule. I mean, that's not specific enough to say he had to rule.
Okay, so what part of this did he actually fulfill? Because you're going to tell me that he fulfilled the part of being born in Bethlehem, but he failed the part of being a ruler.
Well, it's not...
So based on the same logic, everyone who is ever born in Bethlehem is the Messiah.
That's only one first. That's only one prophecy, and did he
do it?
That's the problem with it skipping over this so much.
I'm just reading what the book says.
Right. Out of you comes one who is to rule. Okay, but you're saying that you have perfect knowledge of how that would come to be fulfilled, and I'm not. I'm with
asking you if it was fulfilled. How did it get fulfilled?
I'm not saying that he is physically ruling on earth today.
Okay, so I'm spiritually the king over Israel. Prove me wrong.
But what I'm saying is that's why I didn't want to bring that up, is I can't prove that he did in fact come from Israel without a videotape. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, I don't care. Let's say he came from Bethlehem. I don't care. Show me where he was a ruler.
Well, I would just like the history point. All the evidence doesn't remain on one piece, just like on any investigation. I mean, so you look at a murder.
Does
case.
Matthew say that Micah 5:2 was fulfilled in Jesus?
Does Matthew say that?
Matthew, in the very beginning chapters, first two chapters, I think it's chapter 2, says that according to the Magi, the king that Herod needs to be afraid of is going to be born in Bethlehem, and that's going to happen because it says so in Micah 5:2. So the prophecy is clearly that there's going to be a king born in Bethlehem, but Jesus was never a king.
Right, but
Wait, but
if he
what?
was, but if he was still born in Bethlehem, I mean
I don't care.
that's fine if his rulership is overtaking the earth. I mean,
It says his rule is in Israel. In Israel.
right, but that's true. I don't. You're claiming perfect knowledge. I'm
I'm not
saying
claiming perfect knowledge. I'm saying that words
he,
have meanings.
he came out of Bethlehem, so we can say he came out of Bethlehem, and then all we can do is look at what happened and what is recorded. I mean,
Cool.
you have to look at
I'll
more.
grant you he was born in Bethlehem. I don't care about that. The guy
Right.
born in Bethlehem is going to rule in Israel, and that didn't happen.
Do you see the problem with that? I mean,
Yeah, the
you're
problem
claiming
is that you're saying that Jesus fulfilled Micah 5:2, and then when I ask you when did he fulfill Micah 5:2, you're going to tell me he didn't. Because
when
you're going to say he'll do it later.
it's claiming a future point, one who is to rule, and you're claiming
Okay,
to
so it's not fulfilled.
know, you're claiming to perfectly know when when that point is.
See, this is the problem. The part that you like, the part that anyone can do, being born, that's the part that Jesus fulfilled. The part that's hard, actually being a king, oh, of course, he'll do that later. I can do the same thing. I can say any prophecy about the Bible, I can say, well, listen, it says 10 things are going to happen. I did the easy part. I did that one thing that anyone could do. The rest of it I'll do when I come back. You see how disingenuous that is?
Well, no, if that's all it was, that wouldn't mean anything. But it's the
Does it say
it's
that he's going to come and die and come back 3,000 years later? Or does it just say that one is coming from Bethlehem who will rule in Israel? Does it give you any indication that there are multiple comings?
no, but you look at every prophecy.
Okay, so no, thank you. That's the right
there's
answer.
there's not perfect explanation. That's the
Well, we'll go to the next one. Zechariah 9:9 was fulfilled according to Matthew chapter 21, and it clearly wasn't fulfilled. For example, rejoice greatly, O daughter Zion. Oh, where'd he go? Did he run or did he get disconnected? I don't know what happened. I love Zechariah 9:9. I didn't want him to leave.